All right, well, that's going to take us into our playoff stash, brought to you by Wingstop, talking about guys you want on your bench heading into the playoffs. And Field, Stephania just mentioned it. I mean, Isaac Guerendo, the next man up in that backfield. We've seen him a handful of times this year, and at times he's looked really good in this offense. It just depends on what you're going to need, but available in almost 99% of fantasy.
He's a must. This is the rare Week 14, whatever fab budget you have left, spend literally every last dollar. Is there a chance that Isaac Guerendo is not as effective as Jordan Mason was early on in the season, and he's more like Jordan Mason in his last 3 full games as the starter, in which he had under 10 fantasy points in all of them? Yes. But this guy has the goods to be a very, very productive player in the NFL. 6 foot, 223 pounds, ran a 4.3, 340 coming out of Louisville after starting his career at Wisconsin. A lot of time on the bench because he was playing behind some stars in college football. So not a lot of tread in the tires. It's a good thing here for Isaac Guerendo. He can absolutely scoot. He had that big, long 87-yard run earlier on this season. As we know, it has traditionally been a very fantasy-friendly offense. So Guerendo is the priority if you're in a league in which you have the capacity to hold onto your waiver spot until you want to use it, and you have that first spot. This is the time to utilize it here. Again, if you play in a fab league, risk it all here. If you play in a league in which the trade deadline is not behind us and you are higher up in the order, but you don't really need a running back, I'd grab Guerendo right now.
Great call.
Try to make a trade tomorrow morning for a team that might be more running back needy if you are still in contention. Again, that's a lot of exuberance for a player who may not necessarily give you 25 fantasy points in any given week the rest of the way, but we're Week 14. The rest of the names that we're going to deliver to you guys are going to pale in comparison to Isaac Guerendo.
And by the way, the 49ers obviously had their bye, so you get Isaac Guerendo for good. And if you're wondering how he performed before, when he was the one they were leaning on in Week 6, when Jordan Mason injured his shoulder, he had 10 carries for 99 yards. In Week 8, Mason aggravates his shoulder. Guerendo goes 14 for 85 with a touchdown with 3 catches for 17 yards. So he has proven it to them, meaning they will trust him.
All right. So both of these guys are going to be out, unfortunately, with CMC and Jordan Mason for at least 4 weeks because they've been placed on IR. That would take them up to your first time you could play them would be Week 18 if you have a championship. So if you guys had either of these two, comfortable dropping them?
Yes. I mean, most leagues that I play and end in Week 17 anyways, but if you do play in Week 18, I just don't think you're going to see Christian McCaffrey this year.
Yeah, I don't either. I mean, if they went for a crazy run, somehow made it to the playoffs, somehow we're looking at late playoff, maybe, but it's really, I don't think the team's even thinking that way. They're just focused on him getting healthy.
Agreed.
So grab Isaac Guerendo, and you can drop, unfortunately, CMC and Jordan Mason. And that is our playoff stash, brought to you by Wingstop. Let's dive into the quarterbacks. Field, you and I talked about this at the very beginning. All the quarterbacks that are on bye this week, I got a couple of guys that you can consider. And I want to start with Russell Wilson. After a 400-yard game this week, he's got a pretty good matchup moving forward as well. And he has had a couple of decent games since he came back as the starter.
Yeah, he started 6 games for Pittsburgh now. He has 2 or more passing touchdowns in 3 of them. He has 3 or more passing touchdowns in 2 of them. He has at least 264 passing yards in 4 of his 6 starts. What's been kind of impressive about Russ's take away from Justin Fields as a starting quarterback in Pittsburgh is he has a total of 27 rushing yards this season. For so long, Russ was not just a very talented thrower, but also the kind of guy that might get you 50 rushing yards in a game. That ain't happening anymore, and he is still finding ways to cook. He may end up being the highest ranked of the streaming options available this week, but there are other quarterbacks that I would consider as well, Daniel.
Is Caleb Williams being one of them?
He'd be the next one, and he might even be ahead of Russ. He's got back-to-back weeks, does Caleb, with 26.1 or more fantasy points. Believe it or not, he has 4 games this season, finishing as a top 6 quarterback, does Caleb Williams.
Love that.
For context, that's only 1 fewer than Jaden Daniels, which Jaden's obviously had a much higher floor, but we've seen quite a bit of ceiling here from Caleb this year, and he has 33 or more rushing yards in 3 straight games in 7 games this season. Caleb is not utilized as much as a runner as guys like Jaden Daniels or Lamar Jackson or Jalen Hurts, but very, very good runner in his own right. That adds to the floor of Caleb Williams.
Yeah, since Thomas Brown took over as the offensive coordinator, he has looked really good. At least 16 fantasy points in all 3 games, including over 26 fantasy points in back-to-back games. So it feels like with this shift in this offensive philosophy, Caleb Williams, someone that you can utilize a much tougher playoff schedule than Russell Wilson. So I think I'm with you. If you had someone this week, I actually like Caleb a little bit more than Russ. But if I was looking for someone that I needed for the rest of the season, I like Russell Wilson a little bit more than Caleb Williams.
To my knowledge, the Steelers still have to play the Bengals one more time, so that would be nice for when Russ has to play them.
All right, let's dive into a couple of risky quarterbacks. If you were in a 16-team league or a super flex league, just going to throw these names out there. They're not great, but you know what? Sometimes you need somebody.
Yeah, I would say tread lightly here, guys. I know that we had some excitement surrounding Isaac Guerendo. He's very much the outlier in that regard. It's week 14, so if you're adding a Will Levis, who has been better of late and has a good schedule down the stretch, probably only in Superflex. Same for Bryce Young, Aiden O'Connell, and Mac Jones. O'Connell gets a good matchup this weekend against the Buccaneers.
All right. So, Field, if you had the rest of this, we talked about Isaac Guerendo. We talked about the two quarterbacks. I think they're like the three top ads. Yeah, who's the next man up in your waiver wire?
I'll give you just a couple of names you should have on your radar right now. Parker Washington from the Jaguars, who last week stepped into a clear wide receiver 2 role. He played 80% of the snaps, just a few behind Brian Thomas Jr. as wide receiver 1 for Jacksonville. He had 12 targets. He found the end zone. This is a talented player. Was a 6th-round pick out of Penn State. Has that long punt return touchdown earlier on this season for 96 yards. Good player. The Jaguars are going to have to throw the football quite a bit most weeks because they have been playing from behind very often. And then with no Gabe Davis, no Christian Kirk, not a great running game. Pretty good opportunity here for Parker Washington, again, in a deeper league. And then it is our legal responsibility to mention Nick Westbrook-Ikhine. He breaks every model that Mike has ever come up with. Mike is reshifting the models this week because every time you turn, he is scoring a touchdown. This past week, though, he got 8 targets as well.
Yeah.
Those 8 targets, very notable for Westbrook-Ikhine, who had basically been thriving off of minimal volume but lots of touchdowns. The man is breaking models, and that's good enough that, in this time of the year, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, players like that who, hey, you're going into the final week of the regular season, and you need to beat somebody who's projected to beat you by a decent margin. You throw these kind of high-risk, high-reward players into your lineup, and you never know what can happen.
And at the tight end spot, if you have one of these guys on a bye or you were rolling with Taysom Hill, I would just say that Pat Freiermuth and Taysom Hill's probable replacement in Juwan Jennings would be the next guys up, although we have lowered expectations for those guys, unfortunately.
Last thing that I want to say, and this is not tied to waivers, but it is tied to a player that we have discussed, and Taysom Hill. Taysom Hill being out means something important for Alvin Kamara. Have you guys seen the tear that Kamara is on of late? Let me see if I can pull this up. I'm having internet issues, and I couldn't find the note that I had pulled up. But Alvin Kamara, over his last 5 games, is averaging like 142 yards from scrimmage.
That's ridiculous.
I'm fortunate enough to have him on my Scott Fishbowl team, and he's been sustaining it single-handed.
0 touchdowns in that stretch.
Yeah.
No way.
0. So Alvin feels due, maybe for a bit of a yardage regression, but he also feels due for a touchdown. They play the Giants this weekend. Good opportunity for Kamara to go off, store that thought away for Sunday afternoon.
Rico Dowdle just crushed the Giants, so you know that Alvin Kamara should be in a really
no
good
more
spot.
Dexter Lawrence, by the way, for the Giants.
Right.